In the frozen hell of Belgium, January 1945, a German officer did something that, by all rules of war, should have ended the life of First Sergeant Leonard Funk. He shoved the cold steel muzzle of an MP-40 submachine gun directly into Funk's stomach and screamed a single command: "Surrender." Funk was 5 feet 5. He weighed 140 pounds. He was a former store clerk surrounded by 90 armed German soldiers who had just captured his guards. The math of survival was 0. There was no escape, no reinforcements, no hope. But instead of raising his hands, Leonard Funk did something that chilled the Germans to their core. He started laughing. Not a nervous chuckle, not a plea for mercy. It was a deep, hysterical, mocking laugh that echoed through the snowy farmhouse yard. And in the 45 seconds of confusion that followed, Leonard Funk would commit one of the most insane acts of violence in World War II, an act that would make him the most decorated paratrooper in history. Leonard Funk Jr. wasn't born a killer. He was born in 1916 in Braddock, Pennsylvania, a gritty steel town where you grew up fast or you didn't grow up at all. When the draft came in 1941, the Army looked at this 140-pound clerk and likely thought, desk duty. They were wrong. Funk didn't just join the Army, he volunteered for the paratroopers. In 1941, the Airborne was an experimental suicide club. You jumped out of C-47s at 1,200 feet with nothing but a silk sheet and a prayer, often landing surrounded by enemies. This required a specific kind of mental glitch, a refusal to acknowledge impossible odds. By D-Day, Funk was a veteran squad leader. He dropped into Normandy at 1:30 a.m. under a sky filled with flak. He landed with a shattered ankle, 40 miles from his drop zone, alone in occupied France. Most men would have crawled into a ditch. Funk spent the next 10 days leading a lost patrol of 18 men through German lines, moving only at night, fighting only when necessary. He brought every single one of them back alive. That earned him a Silver Star. But he was just getting started. To understand why Funk laughed at a gun in his gut, you have to understand the Malmedy massacre. Just weeks before the event in Holzheim, the Germans had rounded up 84 American prisoners in a field and machine-gunned them in cold blood. The news of Malmedy hit the American lines like a thunderbolt. The unofficial rules of the Western Front were dead. For Leonard Funk, surrender was no longer an option. If he was going to die, he was going to die on top of a mountain of brass shell casings. On January 29, 1945, Funk was the acting executive officer of Company C, 508th Parachute Infantry. They were ordered to take the village of Holzheim. Funk was so short on men that he went to the headquarters tent and drafted the cooks, the clerks, and the supply guys. "You're all infantry now," he told them. They marched 15 miles through waist-deep snow in a blizzard. They fought from house to house, clearing 15 buildings and capturing 80 Germans. Because the fight was still raging elsewhere, Funk could only spare 4 guards to watch the 80 prisoners in a farmhouse yard. He left them there and went back into the smoke. He didn't know that a German patrol was about to arrive and flip the script. When the German patrol arrived, they overwhelmed the 4 American guards, disarmed them, and freed the 80 prisoners. Now there were 90 armed Germans in the yard, organizing an ambush to hit Company C from the rear. Leonard Funk walked around the corner of the farmhouse, expecting to see his prisoners. Instead, he saw a wall of rifles aimed at his chest. A German officer stepped forward, jammed an MP-40 into Funk's gut, and screamed. He wanted a surrender. He wanted the big prize, the American First Sergeant. And that is when Funk laughed. Psychologically, this was a system error for the German officer. He expected fear. He expected a hands up. He didn't expect a 5'5" American to find his death sentence funny. The officer screamed again, his face turning purple. Funk laughed even harder. He doubled over, shoulders shaking, pointing at the officer. Some of the German soldiers, confused by the lack of tension, actually started to chuckle along with him. The standoff had turned into a surreal comedy. And in that moment of confusion, while the German officer was off balance, Funk made his move. Still appearing to laugh, Funk slowly reached for his Thompson submachine gun slung over his shoulder. To the German officer, it looked like Funk was finally complying, slowly unslinging his weapon to hand it over. But as the muzzle cleared his shoulder, the laugh stopped. With a lightning motion, recorded in his official Medal of Honor citation, Funk swung the Thompson down and pulled the trigger. The 45 ACP rounds hit the German officer at point-blank range, killing him before he could pull the trigger of his own MP-40. Funk didn't stop. He pivoted in the snow, spraying an arc of lead across the Germans nearest to him. "Pick up their weapons!" he screamed to his guards. The yard turned into a meat grinder. Funk reloaded in 2 seconds, muscle memory from years of training. He fired, reloaded, and fired again. The Germans, paralyzed by the sudden shift from laughter to slaughter, didn't know who was shooting or from where. They thought a whole company had hit them. 45 seconds later, 21 Germans were dead. 24 were wounded. The remaining 45 threw their guns down and raised their hands. The prisoners were prisoners again. Leonard Funk stood in the middle of a field of bodies, steam rising from his Thompson, and looked at his men. "That," he said, "was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." On September 5, 1945, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Leonard Funk's neck. Truman, the man who had just ended the greatest war in history, looked at the 5'5" paratrooper and said, "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." Funk finished the war as the most decorated paratrooper in history. He had the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and 3 Purple Hearts. But the most outlier part of his story? He went home to Pennsylvania and took a job as a clerk for the Veterans Administration. For 27 years, the man who laughed at 90 Germans sat at a desk, helping other veterans fill out paperwork for their disability claims. He never wrote a book. He never went on a speaking tour. He never told his daughters about the day in Holtzheim. When people asked about his medals, he simply said, "I did what I had to do." Leonard Funk died in 1992. He is buried in Arlington, Section 35. Most people walk right past his grave, never knowing that it belongs to the man who stared at a gun in his stomach and decided that death was a joke. If you've ever felt like the underdog in your own life, Leonard Funk is the ultimate proof that size and math don't matter. Only the refusal to surrender does. Hit the like button to make sure this short giant is never forgotten. Subscribe for more stories of the outliers who broke the rules of history.